orchestrated original memoir narrative avoiding forbidden names, crafted emotional family betrayal arc, orchestrated original memoir narrative avoiding forbidden names, crafted emotional family betrayal arc. The morning my mother handed me a real estate brochure with a sticky note that said, "We need to talk about the house," I was standing at the kitchen sink scrubbing the same coffee mug I'd been scrubbing for 3 years, the one with the chipped handle that used to be my father's, and I remember thinking, very calmly, that I already knew everything she was about to say to me. I just didn't know yet how far she was willing to go. I was 32. I had been living in that house. Our house, the gray two-story on Birch Lane outside Dayton, with the sagging gutter my father always meant to fix. Since the spring, my dad got his diagnosis. That was almost 7 years before. I want you to understand what those 7 years looked like, because the people in my family had a way of forgetting them, of letting them dissolve into the air like they'd never happened. And I think if I don't lay it all out, you'll do the same thing they did. When my father got sick, I was 25 and I was 3 semesters from finishing my nursing degree. I had a little apartment near campus, a roommate named Brenna, who I still love to this day, and a future I could actually see. I could touch it. And then my dad's hands started shaking and the doctor said the word that ends every other plan you've ever made. And I drove home that weekend and I just never really left. Somebody had to. My sister wouldn't. Naomi was 22 then. Beautiful in the way that makes strangers want to do things for her, and she was finding herself in Chicago, which mostly meant she was bartending and dating a man whose last name she couldn't spell, my mother, Lorraine, but I'll just call her my mother because that's the only thing she ever wanted to be to me when it was convenient. My mother could not be alone with the dying. She would say it just like that. "I cannot be in that room, Maggie. I am not built for it." So she would go to the grocery store for 2 hours to buy a single carton of eggs, and she would come back with her face freshly done, and I would be the one in the room. I dropped my classes. I told myself it was a pause. You always tell yourself it's a pause. I took a job at a billing office because the hours were predictable and somebody had to keep the lights on because my dad's disability didn't cover the mortgage and my mother had never worked a full year in her life. I learned how to lift a grown man who couldn't lift himself. I learned how to crush pills into applesauce and how to read a face for pain that won't speak. I learned how to sleep in 90-minute pieces. And here is the part I need you to hold on to, because it matters later. For the last 4 years of my father's life and the 3 years after he died, I paid the mortgage on that house. Not all of it every month. My mother contributed when she remembered to, which was rarely, but the bulk of it, month after month, came out of my paycheck. By the time my mother set that brochure on the counter, I had a savings account with $38,000 in it that I had built one tired direct deposit at a time. Money I'd protected like a secret because I knew if anyone found out about it, it would stop being mine. My father died on a Tuesday in October. I was holding his hand. My mother was downstairs. Naomi made it home in time for the funeral and cried beautifully, and let 3 different relatives tell her how strong she was being. I tell you all this not because I want you to pity me. I'm past that. I tell you because you have to understand the shape of the thing before you can understand the break. So, the brochure. It was for a development of new condos out by the highway. The kind with a fake Tuscan facade and a clubhouse. And on the sticky note in my mother's looping handwriting were those 5 words: "We need to talk about the house." I didn't say anything that morning. I dried the mug and set it on the rack, and I went to work. And the whole drive there, my stomach was doing that slow turn. It does when your body knows something your brain is still being polite about. The talk happened that Sunday. My mother made a roast, which should have tipped me off because my mother only cooks when she wants something. Naomi drove down from Columbus, where she lived now, and she brought Grant. Grant was new. Grant was the reason for everything, though I didn't fully understand that yet. He was 36, divorced, and he sold commercial insurance, and he wore the kind of quarter-zip pullover that costs more than my car payment. He had a boat. He talked about the boat the way some men talk about their children. Naomi had been with him for 8 months, and she'd already started saying we about things that had nothing to do with her. We sat down to dinner, And my mother passed the potatoes and made small talk for exactly 11 minutes, and then she set down her fork and folded her hands and said, "Maggie, honey, we've been thinking. The house is just too much for us now." Us? There was no us. There was me paying for it and her living in it. "It's a lot of upkeep," she went on, "and it's not getting any younger, and neither am I." She laughed a little at her own joke. "And the truth is, the market's good right now. Grant says we'd never get a better time to sell." I looked at Grant. Grant nodded gravely, like a doctor delivering a prognosis. "Honestly," he said, "you'd be leaving money on the table if you waited." I remember the gravy congealing on my plate. I remember Naomi watching me with this careful, rehearsed sympathy, and I understood right then that this conversation had already happened before this conversation. They'd had it without me. They'd decided. "And where would you go?" I asked my mother. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Well," she said, and she got a little bright and girlish, "that's the wonderful part. With what we'd get for the house, I could put a down payment on one of those condos. No stairs, no yard. It's perfect for me. And there'd be plenty left over to help your sister." Help her with what? Naomi jumped in then, fast, the way she always did when she sensed her name attached to something that needed defending. "Grant and I are getting engaged," she said, and she held up her hand even though there was no ring on it yet, just the idea of one. "And we found this house in Dublin. It's gorgeous, but the down payment is it's a lot, and Mom said she'd help us get started. And the wedding too, and—" "The wedding," I repeated. "It's once in a lifetime, Maggie." I want to tell you that I exploded. I didn't. I have learned, in a life spent absorbing other people's emergencies, that exploding is a luxury for people who have backup. What I did was very quiet. I asked my mother one question. "And me?" She blinked. She actually blinked, like the thought of me as a person with a stake in this had genuinely not occurred to her until I said it out loud at her own table. "What about you, honey?" "I live here. I've lived here for 7 years. I've paid the mortgage on this house for most of them. So I'm asking, when you sell the house out from under me to fund Naomi's wedding, where do I go?" The silence had texture to it. Grant studied his roast. Naomi's mouth was a small, flat line. And my mother, God help her, reached across the table and patted my hand and said, "Oh, Maggie, you're so capable. You've always been able to take care of yourself. You don't need a thing from anybody. That's what makes you so strong. That's what makes you so strong." I have thought about that sentence every day since. It is the most efficient theft I have ever witnessed. In one breath, she turned everything I had given into evidence that I needed nothing, that I was owed nothing, that my whole life of sacrifice was just a personality trait that conveniently required no compensation. I excused myself. I went up to my room, the room I'd slept in as a teenager and come back to as an adult, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I did not cry, and that scared me more than crying would have. I should tell you about the savings because here's where it gets worse before it gets better. 2 days after the dinner, my mother came into the kitchen while I was getting ready for work, and she said, in this casual, offhand way, "By the way, sweetheart, your sister mentioned you'd been putting money aside. That's so smart of you. I was thinking, since you've been able to save and Naomi's just starting out, maybe you could help with the wedding deposit? The venue needs $5,000 by the end of the month to hold the date. You'd get it back, of course, eventually." I don't know how she found out about the account. I'm fairly sure Naomi went through my mail, or my mother did. It doesn't matter. What mattered was the breathtaking arithmetic of it. They were going to take the house I'd paid for, give the proceeds to my sister, and then ask me to also hand over the savings I'd scraped together so that my sister could have a venue with string lights and a signature cocktail. "You'd get it back eventually" is a sentence designed to make a no sound like cruelty. I said I'd think about it. That night I couldn't sleep, and around 2 in the morning I went down to the basement, to the old filing cabinet where my dad kept everything. My father was a man who kept everything. He had warranties for appliances we'd thrown away a decade ago, and I don't even know what I was looking for. I think I just wanted to be near his handwriting. I wanted to be in a room where someone had once thought I was worth something. I found the warranties. I found my parents' marriage certificate in a folder of my report cards he'd saved, which broke something open in my chest. And underneath all of it, in a manila envelope soft with age, I found the deed to the house. Now, I'm going to tell you something my father did. And I want you to understand that I did not know about this. I had no idea. Finding it that night in the basement was the first time. About 6 months before he died, when he could still get around a little, my dad had asked my mother to drive him to an appointment, and she'd complained about it for a week afterward because it had cut into her afternoon. I'd thought it was a doctor. It wasn't. He'd gone to see a lawyer, a man named Mr. Delaney, whose card was paper-clipped to the deed. My father had transferred the house into joint ownership, him and me, with right of survivorship. He had put my name on the deed alongside his own, which meant that when he died, his half didn't go into his estate to be divided up or sold or fought over. It came directly, automatically, completely to me. The whole house. Mine. My mother had never been on the deed at all. The house had been my father's before they married. He'd bought it with money from his own father, and in all their years together, he'd simply never added her name. And in those last months, knowing he was dying, knowing exactly which of his daughters had given up her life to keep his lit, he had quietly, legally, and irrevocably made sure that the one thing he could leave behind would land in the hands of the child who had earned it. There was a letter, too. 2 paragraphs in his shaky, late handwriting. I'm not going to read you the whole thing because it's mine, but the part I'll share said this: that he knew what I'd given up, that he knew nobody else would ever say it out loud, and that he wanted me to have a place that no one could ever make me leave. He wrote, "Don't let them tell you it was nothing. It was everything. You were everything." I sat on the cold basement floor and I cried the way I hadn't cried at the funeral. I cried for him, and I cried for the 7 years, and I cried, honestly, with something that was almost relief, because for the first time since that man got sick, I had ground under my feet that was actually mine. And then I got very, very quiet inside, because I realized my mother didn't know. She thought the house was hers to sell. She had no idea that her dying husband had looked clear-eyed at the family he was leaving and made his choice. She'd been planning a wedding and a condo and a future built entirely on an asset she did not own and could not legally touch. I called Mr. Delaney's office the next morning from the parking lot of my work. He was older now, semi-retired, but he remembered my father immediately. He was very specific, Mr. Delaney told me. He wanted to make sure his daughter, the one who took care of him, he said, was protected. We made it airtight on purpose. Your mother has no claim to the property, Margaret. It's solely yours. I asked him the question I had to ask. If she tried to sell it. She can't, he said simply. She can't list it, can't sign anything, can't transfer it. It's your name on that deed and no one else's. She'd need your signature for anything, and you are under no obligation to give it. I thanked him. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, and then I went inside and I did my job, and I came home and I said nothing. I want to be honest with you about the next part because it's the part I'm least proud of and also the part I'd do again. I didn't tell them right away. I let it ride for almost 2 weeks. I let my mother get the realtor out to take a look. I came home one day to find a woman in a blazer walking through my living room with a clipboard. My mother trailing behind her saying things like, "We'll repaint, of course," and the comparable down the street went for $280. I let Naomi send me a text, asking if I'd figured out the deposit situation because the venue can't hold the date forever. I let Grant send me a follow-up message, unprompted, with a spreadsheet attached, a literal spreadsheet breaking down the family contribution structure for the wedding, in which my name appeared next to a number. I am not a saint. I let them build the whole castle in the air so that I would know with total certainty exactly who they were when they thought the ground was theirs. The reckoning happened on a Saturday 3 weeks after the roast, when my mother had assembled everyone again. Her, Naomi, Grant, supposedly to sign some preliminary paperwork with the realtor, a listing agreement, the thing that would have put the house officially on the market. The realtor was there. The papers were on the table where the roast had been. My mother slid them toward me with a pen. "We just need everybody's signature, sweetheart, to make it official. Just sign right there at the bottom." And I looked at her, and I felt something I had never let myself feel toward my own mother in my entire life, which was a kind of cold, clean clarity. I picked up the papers. I looked at them, and then I set them back down, and I didn't pick up the pen. "I'm not going to sign these," I said. My mother laughed, a thin, nervous laugh. "Don't be difficult, Maggie. The realtor drove all the way out here." "I'm not being difficult. I'm telling you the house isn't for sale." "It's not your decision," Naomi snapped. There she was. "It's Mom's house." "No," I said, "it isn't." And then I reached down into my bag and I took out the folder. The deed. The letter, which I'd had photocopied so I'd never have to surrender the original. Mr. Delaney's letter on his letterhead, confirming sole ownership. I laid them out on the table one at a time, like cards. "Dad put the house in my name before he died," I said. "Joint ownership, right of survivorship. When he passed, it came to me. All of it. Mom, you were never on the deed. You can't sell this house. You never could. It's been mine for 3 years and I never knew it until last month." The realtor, to her credit, picked up her things very quietly and said she'd let herself out. I watched it land on each of their faces, my mother first. A kind of vertigo, like a floor she trusted, had turned out to be painted on a sheet of paper. Naomi went red and then white. Grant, I'll never forget, actually picked up the deed and read it. And I watched the insurance salesman in him recognize that there was no angle, no clause, no out. He set it down and he leaned back from the table and he physically removed himself from the conversation, and I understood in that moment that my sister's engagement had just developed a problem because Grant had not signed up to marry into a family without a house to liquidate. My mother found her voice. "Your father wouldn't, he would never cut me out." "He didn't cut you out of anything you'd earned," I said, and I was surprised by how level I sounded. "He left you everything you actually built. He left me the house because I'm the one who kept it standing. You told me 2 weeks ago that I'm so capable I don't need anything from anybody. So this is me, not needing anything from anybody. This is me taking care of myself, like you always said I could." "You'd do this to your own sister?" my mother said. "Throw us out on the street?" And here's the thing about that house, the thing that I think makes the whole story worth telling. Even then, even with all of it laid out on the table, even after the spreadsheet with my name and a number on it, I didn't throw anyone out. Because I'm not them. That was the whole point. I'd spent 7 years being the person who stayed in the room, and I wasn't going to stop being her just because I finally had the power to. "Nobody's getting thrown out on the street," I said. "You can stay here, Mom. It's your home. I'm not going to put you out of it, but it is not getting sold to pay for a wedding. And I am not giving anyone my savings, and from now on, the things that happen in this house happen because I decide them, not because somebody decides them for me and hands me the bill." I'd love to tell you my mother wept and apologized and we all healed. That's not what happened. What happened was she got cold and small and she said, "Well, I see how you really feel about your family," as though I were the one who tried to sell a person's home out from under her. Naomi stood up and grabbed her coat and said something I won't repeat about how she'd always known I was selfish, and Grant followed her out, and within 4 months the engagement that didn't have a ring yet quietly dissolved, and I never saw him again. I won't pretend that didn't give me one small, ungenerous flicker of satisfaction. But here's what else happened, and this is the part I actually want you to take with you. I went back to school. I was 33 by the time I started my nursing classes again, sitting in lecture halls full of 22-year-olds, the oldest person in every room. The savings I protected, the $38,000 they wanted me to hand over for string lights. That money paid my tuition, covered my hours when I had to cut back at the billing office, and kept the lights on in the house that was now, finally, undeniably mine. Every direct deposit I'd ever protected had been protecting this. I just hadn't known what this was yet. My mother lived with me for another year and a half. We existed in a kind of careful truce. She never thanked me. Not once. Not for any of it. Not the 7 years. Not the choice I made to let her stay. But somewhere in there, a strange thing happened, which is that with the power finally distributed honestly between us, with no more pretending I was the bottomless well everyone could draw from, she and I actually started to have something like a real relationship. Smaller, cooler, but real. She moved out eventually, into a senior apartment she paid for herself with my father's pension, which it turned out was plenty for one person who wasn't trying to bankroll a wedding. We have dinner sometimes. We don't talk about the house. Naomi and I didn't speak for almost 2 years. Then she called me one night out of the blue. The engagement long dead, the gorgeous house in Dublin, a thing that had never existed. And she said, in a voice I almost didn't recognize because it had no performance in it, "I think I owe you an apology. And we're not what we were as little girls. And maybe we never will be, but we're something." She comes down for the holidays now. The first time she walked back into the house on Birch Lane, she stopped in the doorway and looked around like she was seeing it new, and she said, very quietly, "Dad really loved you, didn't he?" And I said, "Yeah, he did." I'm a nurse now. I work in oncology, which my friends think is morbid given everything, but I think they have it exactly backward. I know how to be in the room. I learned it the hard way. In this house, with my father, and there's not a single shift where I don't feel him standing somewhere behind me. The man who couldn't fix the gutter but who drove to a lawyer's office while he was dying to make sure his daughter would always have a door that locked from the inside on her own terms. That coffee mug with the chipped handle is still in my cabinet. I still use it. Sometimes my mother, when she visits, will pick it up and say, "I should really just throw that old thing away. It's chipped, it's seen better days." And every time, I take it back from her, gently, and I rinse it out and I put it where it belongs. It's mine. It was always going to be mine. Some things you don't have to ask anyone's permission to keep. For a long time, I believed that giving everything I had would eventually be seen, that someone would do the math on those 7 years and arrive at a number that meant something. I was wrong about that, and the day my mother patted my hand and called me strong was the day I finally understood why people don't reward the well they drink from. They just keep drinking. The reason my family felt free to plan a wedding and a condo on the back of my labor was simple. I had taught them, one quiet sacrifice at a time, that there would never be a cost. Every yes I gave when I was exhausted, every check I wrote without a word, became a lesson to them that my needs were optional. That's the hard arithmetic of it. We train people in how to treat us, and I had been a very patient teacher of the wrong thing. But there's another side to that same law, and it's the side my father understood better than I did. He couldn't fix the gutter and he couldn't beat his diagnosis, but he could look honestly at his own family and act on what he saw. He didn't leave the house to the daughter who cried prettiest at his funeral. He left it to the one who stayed in the room. That wasn't luck, and it wasn't sentiment. It was a clear-eyed person making a decision that matched reality, instead of the story everyone wanted to tell. The clarity to see things as they actually are, and not as we wish they were, might be the most underrated kind of intelligence there is. He had it at the end, and finding that deed in the basement taught me to grow it in myself. What I'm proudest of isn't that I won. It's how I won. When the ground finally belonged to me, I had every right to throw them out, and I didn't. I let my mother stay. I held the line on the house and the savings without becoming the kind of person who would do to her what she tried to do to me. Holding power and refusing to abuse it, that's the whole test, and most people fail at the second they get the chance. I didn't, and that's the part Naomi finally understood 2 years later when she called with the performance gone from her voice. So if you take anything from what happened in that gray house on Birch Lane, let it be this. Be kind, but never let your kindness become a discount other people shop at. Pay attention to who people are when they think the floor belongs to them. And find the steadiness to do the right thing slowly, when no one is clapping. the way my father drove to a lawyer's office while he was dying, so a door would always lock from the inside on my terms. Strength was never about needing nothing. It was about knowing exactly what I was worth and finally refusing to hand it away.